Morning everyone. Apologies to those of you who are in Rochdale. You're going to get the same slides, bar a couple of tweaks from that event. As Mike says, I'm Steve Halsall. I head up the property consulting group at CACI, so we're largely working with the property owners, developers such as Westfield, who I think Steve you mentioned before, and hopefully we'll give you a bit of an insight into how we use InstantAtlas during the course of the next 15 minutes or so. Just going to briefly talk about CACI for those of you who don't know who we are. Go on to talk about how we're using InstantAtlas in our consultancy work, and then just touch on a couple of case studies. One with Home Group, which is a very brief one. Many of you, I wasn't really involved in that, so I don't know that much about it, but there are people here from CACI who know a bit more. And then the second one is a client of ours, Westfield, and given Steve spoke this morning about the great things that are going on in his borough, we're going to touch on a bit of that with Westfield Stratford City, which opened last year. And then just talk about some of the benefits that our clients are seeing, and also the benefits that CACI is seeing from the use of InstantAtlas. So for those of you who don't know CACI, we're an IT and marketing services company founded in 1976. Myself and the colleagues who are here today are part of the location planning group. So we're typically working with public sector organisations, retailers, property developers, financial services. We're all around location analysis, helping optimise planning of resources according to customers, citizens, and the like. We're based in Kensington, and we've got about 80 employees in our office. Is that right? That's in our team, sorry. Here's an example of a few of the retail and property clients that my team tend to work with. So Land Securities, Westfield, you may be more familiar with. We work with a number of international operators as well, people like McCarthy Glen and factory outlet centres across Europe. And we do a whole host of work with them. And then the retailers like John Lewis, who take our models and use that in their site selection process. As well as commercial organisations, we have a whole raft of public sector clients, some of who will be here today. Certainly we had a few questions in Rochdale from some of our clients. And that's everything from provision of data through to our insight tool, which I'll talk about briefly later on, all the way through to full consultancy projects and segmentations. So a bit about the role of InstantAtlas at CACI. CACI's main strength is in these three key areas, I think. Data, for which these are just some examples. You may have heard of Acorn as one of our core sort of flagship products, which is a segmentation of UK neighbourhoods at postcode level, all the way through to a whole range of other data sets to do with online behaviour such as E-types. So we're very data rich, we're very data centric. Our core GIS market analysis software is Insight, which my team use extensively. Our biggest user of Insight, I think, is actually the internal team, but we have a number of clients who take that. And typically my team's consultancy is in deploying reports in PDF format or spreadsheets in Excel, PowerPoint presentations such as these, and in Word as well. Insight's very good, but it's quite a narrow user base in relation to the whole organisation. So when I joined over 2 years ago to CACI, I recognised that at the moment it's either Insight for clients or just static reports. There wasn't sort of anything in between. So that's where I put a case forward to implement InstantAtlas. My team have largely been using InstantAtlas desktop, but I won't talk about it today, but we have successfully implemented InstantAtlas server for a client, Kia, who are obviously a major car manufacturer across the world. The logos here, I can't quite see the ones on the right hand side, are clients who are using InstantAtlas since we introduced it 18 months ago. The ones we're going to focus on today, as I mentioned, was Home Group and Westfield. So I'll talk a little bit about Home Group. They're based up in the northeast, in Newcastle, and they're a leading provider of affordable and supported housing in the UK. And they currently take a full range of our products. So I mentioned Insight before. They take Insight to do spatial analysis and reporting. They take data, including Acorn, and we're in the process of doing we've completed a bespoke segmentation for them. And their requirement around InstantAtlas was they have these monthly reports that they disseminate out to their regional managers. They wanted to streamline and save cost in relation to dissemination of that information. So we implemented an InstantAtlas solution, which you can see a screen grab from on the bottom right-hand corner here. And then, so they essentially use two tools. One is Insight to manage the data that they collect on housing schemes, and then they produce reports and InstantAtlas output to disseminate that information. So that's one example which is fairly new to our client list of InstantAtlas. The other one is Westfield. So Westfield are a leading global owner of shopping centres. They originate from Australia, but they have a significant presence in the US as well, and obviously the UK. So schemes we've been involved in: Derby, Tunbridge Wells, Belfast, Murray Hill, and obviously their flagship up until recently was Westfield London, and they've recently opened Stratford City. So I'll give you a flavour as to Stratford City. It's Europe's largest shopping centre. How many of you been there so far? That's good. They'll be very pleased to know that there's a whole load of untapped potential. Essentially, it's the as I said, the Europe's largest shopping centre. There's over three. In fact, there was more people who were in Rochdale who've been to Stratford City than in this group. It's anchored by John Lewis, Waitrose and M&S. Recently opened Asper's Casino, which we were involved in the planning for that. And big cinema. Opened in September last year. Certainly worth a trip to tie in with a tour around the Olympic venue. And essentially, it will be the main thoroughfare to the Olympic Stadium from Stratford Terminal. We're effectively the outsourced agency for Westfield in terms of location planning. So we get involved when there's a hole in the ground, there's a development opportunity. So when Stratford City was effectively a vacant site, looking at things like how big should the scheme be, how supportable is a 2 million square foot scheme, through to what sort of retailers should Westfield be speaking to about getting in, from their anchor tenants through to smaller units, but also what's the sort of mix, how much ladies wear should we have as opposed to footwear. So we get involved with all of that sort of development opportunity analysis. Then once a scheme is open, such as Stratford City, we get involved with exit surveys. So Stratford City, we do 3 surveys a year. So whenever someone stops you in the shopping centre as you're leaving and asks you for your postcode, we're using that data. Not to mail you, by the way, but it's all around trying to understand how we can improve or help our clients improve conversion, I suppose, and average spend, dwell time, all those sort of key metrics. We get involved with leasing support. So I think over the weekend, Westfield London, they've announced an extension to that scheme. And we've been working on understanding what other anchor tenants could take space in this new extension that they're proposing. So all that sort of new centre analysis we get involved in. And then stable centres, such as the Guildfords of this world, it's largely around exit surveys and providing some of those KPIs. Mentioned one of the data sets we've got in the slide earlier is retail footprint. So this is essentially a model of where people shop. So we know from credit and debit card data where people are living and spending their money. This is a model that essentially retailers and property companies use to understand existing markets, things like leakage, market share, things like that. And then what we can do in-house is essentially simulate putting in a new shopping centre such as Stratford City and seeing what the impacts will be on surrounding centres. So this is one of the core data components for our analysis. And we load that into InstantAtlas. So this is an example from some Westfield marketing literature, which is just looking at the catchment, and they typically segment the catchment based on primary, where you're getting sort of 50% of the trade, secondary, tertiary, and even quaternary, where you're sort of getting the last 10% of trade. And then from Westfield's perspective, it's all about trying to understand who should we be marketing. Perhaps the primary, we've got them on the doorstep. Westfield Stratford City is the most convenient to those people, so we don't really need to be spending as much on marketing. As you get further out, there are other people who are perhaps have a better choice in terms of blue water or lakeside or something like that. So it's about how can we, who out of those groups of people do we want to get in, and how can we target them and effectively influence their purchase behaviour. So that's all around understanding catchment areas from a consumer perspective, but also from a retail perspective in leasing support. The other thing that we do quite a lot is use Acorn. So I mentioned before, this classifies all the 1.82 million postcodes in the UK according to 5 groups, 5 categories and 17, 18 groups. We do go down to another type level which is more detailed, but typically for my type of work we're working at the group level. I'll show you an example of Stratford City now. So this is the profile for Stratford City. It's, I think mentioned before, Stephen mentioned how it's quite a diverse population. The challenge that Westfield have compared to London is that there's this sort of big spike at this far end here, which is inner city adversity. So it's about, they're on the doorstep, they still have money to spend, probably not as much as the wealthy execs at this end, but look at how many wealthy execs there are in the Stratford City catchment. So that's why, there's a Primark in Westfield Stratford City compared to not within Westfield London. And that provides specific challenges, and obviously there's things around employment. A lot of the people down this side of the Acorn scale will typically work in Stratford City and the Olympic site as well. So it's all about understanding demographics, who's shopping in the centre, who's spending in the centre, who's thieving from the centre, all that sort of stuff is quite important to Westfield Stratford City. In Rochdale last week I gave a demo, but I overran, so I'm deliberately not doing it now, so I'm just going to do some screenshots. So this is an example of Westfield Stratford City. Here what we're looking at is their sort of catchment extent, and we're just looking at the total households allocated to educated urbanites. So where there's dark blue, that's a higher proportion of educated urbanites. And it's not very clear at the bottom, but this is a full Acorn profile for each of those postal sectors that we've selected on the map. So what Westfield can do is effectively understand, well, if we were going to mail this particular postal sector, we're much more likely to get educated urbanites. They're typically younger, fresh from university, very fashion, brand orientated, so the marketing message might be very different compared to, inner city adversity, for example. The other thing we tend to use quite a lot, Westfield tend to segment the catchment. If you remember before, I was talking about primary, secondary, tertiary catchments. Westfield will tend to focus their marketing spend on perhaps the secondary and tertiary catchments, where there's a lot of opportunity to try and influence people's visit behaviour. So we use the filter function within InstantAtlas to effectively remove that primary catchment and just focus on some of those areas that might fall. In this example, we've got the tertiary north, so that's part of the tertiary that happens to fall north of Stratford City. So who's using this? Westfield are using this in terms of leasing, so when they're in front of retailers, they might say, we know your typical target demographic, and this is where they are within the catchment. They're using it in terms of marketing to do some of the things which I've explained before. This isn't Westfield, this is Land Securities, but this is taking things down another level. So this is scheme level information. So a lot of our shopping centre owners will monitor information relating to retailer category in this case, through to footfall information, through to when leases are expiring, and this information can quite easily be loaded on a map. It doesn't have to be census geography or postal geography. It could be other geographic units, such as physical units of a shopping centre. So this is something that we're developing at the moment, and we've got quite a lot of interest from some of our property clients. So hopefully that's given you a flavour for Westfield. I'm just going to conclude with a couple of slides. So it's fair to say so far we've been developing the use of InstantAtlas within property and retail. So it's all around understanding consumers, targeting consumers. It's all around trying to be more efficient in the way they operate. It's used as a sales tool, improved direct marketing, and we also used it in some of the sales and territory monitoring. The home group is a good example of that territory monitoring. I think there's plenty of opportunity for growth. Obviously the representation in the audience today is very public sector focused. our team to date have not really been focusing on the public sector. I mean, from the client logos we had before, there's a whole load of areas where we feel that InstantAtlas could add value to what we do to our clients, and these are some of the areas to watch out in the future. Hopefully, we might get invited next year to talk about what we've been doing in these sorts of areas. In terms of client benefit, I think we talked about them this morning already, but very much around visualising the data in a slightly different way. Granted, some people prefer still to see things in spreadsheet format. You know, Home Group, we've helped streamline the processing, that process of disseminating location-based information. It's a flexible solution. We can extend it as the client need evolves. Clients like the fact that it's so visual and interactive, so sort of saying, well, as well as using it in my day-to-day job, when I'm doing presentations, I can just pop up an InstantAtlas report and sort of interact with it live in a presentation. And, it's great that there's minimal training and setup from a client's perspective. The other thing down the bottom, saving costs. So we get a lot of clients who will phone up saying, can you tell me this? Can you just do this? And they're small bits of work that we charge for. So ultimately that's helped save them costs, because now we're empowering our clients with the data to be able to do that. CACI benefits, we're all about trying to promote our data to end users, and if we can spread the use of our data across an organisation, then that can be great. Ultimately it does lead to other projects as well, and we have successfully generated incremental revenue streams both on the consultancy side and the data side from showing this data. I mean, one big pitch that my team did a couple of years ago to one of the shopping centre owners, one of the reasons they said that they went with our solution was because of this InstantAtlas deployment. It's not just about paper reports, we're giving them a relatively simple tool for them to use. And obviously it's about demonstrating and evolving our offer and innovating and differentiating our offer to clients. So that's me done. Any questions?
How do you get data from Insight down to Atlas?
How?
Yeah, you download it or?
Yeah, well traditionally we've just exported it in Excel format and then used the Excel